Hi, I'm in a different location. In the last video, we talked about a bunch of timeline stuff in regards to Five Nights at Freddy's the week before, so today we're going to do some more of that. Less so about when this book takes place and more about what the setting of this book means for when other events in the series take place. So, today I want to talk about William Afton getting spring-locked. I don't think you guys realize just how much this has been gnawing at the back of my mind ever since I first read the book. So for a while now, many people have speculated that the first Freddy's location, the one where the missing children's incident happened, is the same physical building that we play in FNAF 1. MatPat first came to this conclusion in his FNAF 3 Part 2 Part 1 video. Yes, that's actually how it's structured. I still think it's ridiculous. The main point of this theory is in regards to the safe rooms we learned about in FNAF 3. If the FNAF 1 location was an entirely separate building, there wouldn't be any point for it to have a safe room because all the safe rooms were sealed off around the time of the MCI. But in the FNAF 3 Follow Me minigames, which according to the map layouts do take place in the FNAF 1 location, we see there is in fact a safe room there, and that's where Purple Guy hides and eventually gets spring-locked. So this happens, presumably, allegedly, at the FNAF 1 location, but like a version of it where it's falling apart and it's in a really bad state of repair. And a lot of people will interpret this to mean that it takes place long after the events of FNAF 1. But here's my issue with that. In one of the tapes we hear in FNAF 3, Phone Guy says that the safe rooms are being sealed at most locations.
That due to budget restrictions, the previously mentioned safe rooms are being sealed at most locations, including this one.
Okay, so they're sealed off. So how does Afton get inside? Obviously, we can assume he broke into the building itself, so can we also assume that he broke into the safe rooms too? I mean, kinda, but it's a little more complicated than that. In FNAF 3, Phone Dude tells us,
Some guy who helped design one of the buildings says it was like an extra room that got boarded up, or something like that. So we're gonna take a peek and see what we can find.
And that's the room where they find Springtrap. But if they had to break open the sealed off safe room in order to find Springtrap in the first place, then how did it get boarded up again? We could assume that Fazbear's Fright has had access to the Freddy's locations, if not all of them, then definitely this one, for quite a while before the events of FNAF 3. Especially since they literally find the desk fan in there, which we do see in the Follow Me minigame.
We found a desk fan, very old school, metal though. So watch the fingers.
So with the commonly accepted timeline, this is how it stands. So the safe rooms are installed at the FNAF 1 location and other Freddy's locations. After a while, the spring lock suits are decommissioned because
Of an unfortunate incident involving multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures.
Sometime after this, the Spring Bonnie animatronic was noticeably moved. Now, I don't think this happened right after it was decommissioned because obviously employees are gonna move the Spring Bonnie suit around like while the memo goes out, like maybe they didn't hear it was decommissioned. So that tells me that it was in one place for a while before it was noticeably moved. Later on, all the safe rooms are boarded up because of budget restrictions, like what every restaurant does. They board up parts of the restaurant if it's, too expensive. That's normal, right? And the employees are told by management by way of Phone Guy, essentially to never speak of them ever again.
Management also requests that this room not be mentioned to family, friends, or insurance representatives.
The location closes after the MCI. Years pass, it eventually opens again for FNAF 1, then it closes again, and then years after that, William Afton breaks in and lures all the animatronics to the back until he eventually gets spring-locked. And then after this, the safe room somehow gets boarded up again, despite the fact that nobody uses this building for literal decades. And then Phone Dude eventually finds the safe room on word from one of the building designers, breaks back in and retrieves Springtrap and sets him loose in Fazbear's Fright. Yeah, no, this is dumb. Who resealed the door? And don't give me some nonsense like, oh, it was the ghosts of the dead kids, they resealed the door, because if the dead MCI kids are this adept at construction, there are so many better uses for this ability. It would be like the force speed thing from Star Wars The Phantom Menace that they use once at the beginning of the movie and then never again for the rest of the franchise.
Let's go.
What if we entertained the idea that the Follow Me minigames take place obviously after the MCI, but before the events of FNAF 1? Well, this brings with it some heavy implications, because if we consider the idea that Afton gets spring-locked before the FNAF 1 location reopens, then that means the entire time we're playing through the week before and FNAF 1, Afton is in the walls. And I know this is going to irk some people who think that Maintenance Man Dave from the week before is a reference to Dave Miller from the Silver Eyes, which is William Afton's alias. But I don't really like that theory, especially because we know how Scott likes to cycle the same 4 names on repeat forever. Anyway, I want to share something that stuck out to me immediately the first time I read through the week before. And this is from a segment where Ralph has to crawl through the ventilation shaft to get past the animatronics. As you grope around for another path, your hand falls on something thin and dry, wrapped in threadbare fabric. It makes you think about the skeleton model in your high school biology classroom. This is a bone, you think. You drop it with a resounding thud, but you don't examine it any further. You don't want to know if it belonged to a human, or why it's here. As soon as I read this, the first thought in my mind was, is that William Afton's bone? Now, Ralph chooses not to investigate any further, so we don't even know if it's a human bone. It is wrapped in threadbare fabric, which makes me think it's a human bone, but we don't have a concrete answer. It could be from William. It could be just from an animal. It could be an MCI kid for all we know. Or it could be someone entirely different altogether, because we know how much Fazbear likes to cover up mysterious deaths. The story leaves it open-ended by saying that Ralph merely thinks it's a bone. But listen, this is Spooky Pizzeria. It is definitely a bone. Now, for those of you who haven't clicked off the video already or scurried to the comment section to tell me every reason of exactly why I'm wrong before you've even heard what I had to say, I want to explain why I like the William theory. So we know explicitly from the games that Springtrap has the ability to vent crawl. We know this from FNAF 3, Pizzeria Simulator, and Ultimate Custom Night. That's like all he does. That's his thing. I'm pretty sure it's even in the thumbnail. We can assume that the safe room has some kind of ventilation connection with the rest of the building. It just says that the door was sealed off. I'm pretty sure Fazbear wouldn't have forked over the extra money to seal off the air ducts too. So whether it's William trying to escape the building or it's Spring Bonnie's programming to follow the sounds and smells to be where the party is, he probably does a little vent crawling. I mean, he's got several decades to do it. It's fairly easy to picture that while traversing the vents, he, lost a few pieces along the way. And we know from the book that the vents allow for animatronics to move through them. These shafts are probably big enough for an animatronic to pass through, so someone your size has no trouble negotiating them. Or more specifically, you forge ahead. At least the shaft isn't as cramped as you would have expected. It's probably much bigger than it needs to be. Even Bonnie could probably fit inside. Maybe I'm reaching a little, but I find it very interesting that it specifically mentions Bonnie. If you want to just convey the information that any of the animatronics could fit into the vents, the first quote I read would suffice. But that brings with it a few questions of its own, like, how did he never escape after all that time? How was a random children's birthday party never interrupted by a rotting yellow carcass suddenly falling from the ceiling? Well, we see in the week before that Ralph has to put considerable effort into opening the vent covers. He even has to use a screwdriver at one point. And if you don't have that in your inventory, you're dead. That being said, we do see the animatronics following him through the vents. It's unclear if they just used the same entrance that he did, or if they have enough raw robot strength to tear off the vent covers at will. Obviously, those things aren't mutually exclusive, like they could easily have enough strength to rip off the vent covers, but also have just used the entrance that Ralph used. But if they do have enough strength to tear off the vent covers, why did Springtrap just not do that? Well, Spring Bonnie was already not in the best shape when William got spring-locked, so it's possible that the mechanisms have just corroded enough to where he can't get the vent covers off. I'd imagine that William bleeding all over them did not help much either. Anyway, this is just my theory. Like I said, I really like it. But there is one thing that really bugs me about it when it comes to the week before. Let me put it this way. How do we as the player know that the safe rooms are being sealed off in the first place? We are explicitly told by our vent crawly boy, Ralph. In the book, we're told this. Some branches lead to dead ends for no discernible reason, while others let out into dusty rooms you don't even recognize. It seems like whole sections of the building have been closed off over the years. Or perhaps they're expansions that were abandoned before completion. But unless this in fact isn't the MCI location, which based on what we've looked at in this video, that is very unlikely, then he definitely knows about one boarded up room very explicitly. Like he was literally the one to tell everyone to forget it ever existed.
Management also requests that this room not be mentioned to family, friends, or insurance representatives.
Apparently that applied to him too, because the book does not bring it up. Out of universe, it makes sense that there would only be hints about boarded up rooms, and that would help us make the connection to other events in the series. Like, Scott can't always spell everything out like he did in Sister Location.
Father, it's me, Michael.
Now, as far as an in-universe explanation, I don't think we should overthink it too much. It's very possible, at least in my mind, that Ralph was just not actively thinking about the safe room. At the time of the week before, it could have been anywhere from 4 to 14 years, depending on your timeline, from when the safe rooms were sealed off. Since Fazbear seems to like covering things up fairly regularly, even if he had to record the memo about the safe rooms, I think it's fairly plausible that Ralph saw this as one of many cover-ups that he had to record memos for. And keep in mind, this vent crawling segment happens on night 4 of the week before. Ralph is in a very high-stress situation. The animatronics are going berserk in the dining area, and he's just trying to find his way to the breaker room in order to shut off the power. I don't think we can really blame him for crawling through the grimy air duct without actively reminiscing on every employee memo he's ever recorded. That's just me though, maybe y'all would do that. So with everything I just explained, this is the timeline that I think is the most plausible. So it starts off the same as the first timeline we went over. Safe rooms are constructed at several Freddy's locations, including the FNAF 1 location. The spring lock suits are decommissioned because of a failure at the sister location. Sometime later, the spring Bonnie animatronic is noticeably moved. The safe rooms are sealed at most locations, and employees are told never to mention them again. And then after this, the location closes after the MCI. So the animatronics are then taken from the MCI location and used for spare parts at the FNAF 2 location. And then like 2 weeks later, the FNAF 2 location shuts down because of the bite of 87. So then the Wizards are moved back to the MCI location, whether for a potential reopening or because they sold off the FNAF 2 building and they couldn't keep them there anymore. Doesn't matter, they make it back to the MCI location. While the location is still closed, Afton breaks back in, whether it's to get to the animatronics for remnant purposes or whatever, we don't know, we just know that he gets in based on the Follow Me minigames. So then Afton lures each animatronic back to the safe room one by one, and even after all these years, it's still in their programming that they can't see or access the safe room. So after dismantling each animatronic, Afton sees the ghosts of the kids. They spook him into the spring Bonnie suit, but because of the general state of repair of the building, the suit catastrophically fails and crushes Afton to death. Then Fazbear eventually chooses to reopen Freddy's using the original building. However, when they get there, they see the disassembled animatronics on the ground, they see the safe room broken open, and Springtrap lying on the floor. So in my mind, Fazbear sees this and they're like, ugh, gross. And then they seal off the safe room and proceed with the reopening anyway. I think it's not only possible that this happened, but I think it's very likely that it happened. There's a point in the book where we see Ralph cleaning up a huge puddle of blood, and the thought that goes through his head is, if there's no evidence, it may as well have never happened. I think Fazbear just boarded up the safe room again with the mindset, if there's no evidence, it may as well have never existed. This is where in my mind it reconverges with the other timeline, with the exception of Afton getting spring-locked, which already happened. It progresses the same as you would expect. Phone Dude finds Springtrap eventually and then sets him loose in Fazbear's fright, and here we are. And if you still have an issue with the Follow Me minigames taking place pre-FNAF 1, I would like to bring up something that other people before me have already brought up. So in FNAF 2, we see Withered Bonnie and Withered Freddy both have buttons. You look at the Follow Me minigames, and again, they both have buttons. But in FNAF 1, those buttons are absent. Personally, I believe this is from Afton disassembling them in the Follow Me minigames, and then Fazbear subsequently reassembling them in preparation for the reopening of the FNAF 1 location. You may think that's a bit of a reach, but listen, people in this franchise have reached for even more far-fetched things with even less evidence, so I think I'm a little bit entitled to button theory, okay? You may also wonder how Withered Bonnie, has a face again. And my interpretation of events is either the Wizards were restored right after the FNAF 2 location closed, or the Wizards, by the time of Follow Me, had just been restored in preparation for a reopening. and then Afton heard about that, and that's what prompted him to break back into the building. But I will leave that up to you guys. Even if you're very skeptical of my Springtrap theory, I'm still very interested to hear your perspective on if the MCI location is or is not the same as FNAF 1 and how that ties into the sequence of events in the week before. I really like my theory that William has physically been there since the very start of the franchise. I think from a storytelling perspective, there's something so eerie and unsettling to just think back to when Mike was reading all those newspaper clippings about children going missing, when the one who set all of those events into motion was always there. But yeah, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, either way, go ahead and leave a comment. Like, that's what the comment section is for. It's to comment. I'm horrible at ending videos. You guys can go now. I mean, I won't keep you any longer. It's okay, cool. My laptop's about to die.